Welcome to the E-Commerce Momentum Podcast, where we focus on the people, the products, and the process of e-commerce selling today. Here's your host, Stephen Peterson.
Welcome back to the E-Commerce Momentum Podcast. This is episode 24, REA Sheinbein. I introduce REA as one of the smartest guys I've ever met, and I mean that when I say it. He is just so analytical, so smart, so brilliant. I mean, just really smart. In this segment, we spend a lot of time talking about how REA started selling, and it's pretty surprising. He was buying on eBay and selling on Yahoo. Yes, that's right. Yahoo used to offer auctions for those of us who've been in the business a while. I remember those. And that was his first attempt at arbitrage that long ago. Got out of it, came back in, found Amazon FBA, the standard pattern I think most people follow. But he really has done a great job with it and realized a few things along the way. So let's get into the podcast. All right, welcome back to the E-Commerce Momentum Podcast. And tonight's guest is... I have to say, one of the smartest people I ever met, and he's going to be embarrassed when I say that, but, I meet a lot of people, and I remember, I guess it's been a year or so ago, we were hanging out, and I listened to him in this conversation, and I thought to myself, oh my God, I am so dumb, and he is so smart. REA Sheinbein. Welcome, REA.
Thank you very much, and yes, I am embarrassed, but thank you.
I know you're embarrassed, but let me tell you, dude, you blew me away, because, we have similar backgrounds, right? We're both full-time employed in some financial aspect. I'm an accountant by trade. And so I'm pretty good with stuff. And then when I sat and listened to you, it just took me to places I had not thought of. And I'm thinking to myself, man, I should be thinking of these. I have an MBA. I should be knowing these things. And you were right there, and you were so quick to get there. And then the details, it was just so impressive. And I'm not blowing smoke at you. That's the real truth, and you're going to have to swallow it because that's what I say. It's my show.
Okay, thank you.
So you've been selling a long time, which is really interesting to me. You started like I did way back in the day in eBay. So how did you get started in eBay way back?
So it's interesting. I remember the first time in the 90s when it was actually even before eBay. I think about it now, that Yahoo had their own auction site, and back then, I know it's kind of come around a little bit now, there was a big craze for Furbies, and there was no real online selling from the stores, and people used to wait outside to buy these Furbies. And I don't even remember what they cost, but they were going for like 3x, 4x online. It was a typical supply and demand issue. And for whatever reason, I started, I think one of my cousins, someone wanted a Furby, and I remember one of my aunts waited online for hours to get her one. And so, it looked no different than, physical product trading versus stock trading. And for whatever reason, there was basically an arbitrage on the market between Yahoo auctions and eBay auctions. People were seemingly paying more money on Yahoo auctions than they were on eBay. So I started buying some of these Furbies on eBay and then just selling them on the Yahoo auctions. And that's really what got me started. And it then kind of ballooned into, I had always followed sports cards and collected sports cards when I was younger, and knew the pricing really, really well. And it was interesting what had kind of happened to the card market, and noticing again that there was an arbitrage again between eBay and Yahoo, as well as like the regular retail stores for this stuff. So it kind of took off from there. That was really how I got into it. It wasn't like any real game plan to sell online.
But you were young, and so you were doing retail arbitrage before there was retail arbitrage, really. I mean, when you think about it. So, I mean, would you go to a card shop? Back then, they were card shops, probably, right? And buy particular item and then pop it up on Yahoo because it was selling higher. I'm sure you sourced from eBay too, but is that what you were talking about?
Well, no, actually, what happened was so after the Furby thing, I went to a card store, and cards had evolved. Like when I was a kid, like there was Topps, there was Fleer, there was Donruss, and now all of a sudden, like Upper Deck and everybody, they had migrated this model where they put pieces of people's jerseys and bats and autographs in the packs, and the packs were like, instead of like 25 to like 25 cents a dollar, they were like $5 for a pack of 5 cards, because you had a chance of getting this, autographed or piece of jersey in the card. And the prices were ridiculous. They were, I was in Manhattan, and I walked in like on a lunch break just to like go into the store, and I saw these prices. So that's what drove me back to eBay and Yahoo, and I saw there that, let's say, the retail store it was kind of like the reverse. The retail store was charging $120 for a box of cards. You could buy them on eBay for, let's say, $50. Again, it was a sealed box of packs, and then on Yahoo they were getting, let's say, $80 to $100. So it was almost like reverse. So I started buying things on eBay to resell on Yahoo. And then it ended up getting into wholesale accounts. There was a whole market back then before the 01, let's call it, bust of a lot of these cards. There was a big thriving market early 01 when it was actually Albert Pujols and Ichiro's rookie, and some of these cards were like super valuable. So it wasn't a store to online like a lot of FBA sellers are doing now. It was more almost like online marketplace to online marketplace.
How did you find wholesalers back then?
What was actually interesting is as you began to sell back then, they seemingly were looking to be able to move product. So some of them actually reached out to me. So back in the day, a lot of these systems, Yahoo Auctions, and even Amazon Marketplace, which then was like Z Market, and eBay, you could reach out to people and communicate, and like they didn't stop you, they didn't have limits. You could have domain names as part of your username on eBay. So there were lots of, let's call it loopholes, or the market was very, very different back then. And, long story short, what happened was there were hot products and there were duds. And a lot of these little mom and pop local stores, in order to get the hot products, they had to buy all the duds from the manufacturers. They'd make them buy, let's say, Topps came out with like 10 different lines a year for the same baseball season. And there were 2 hot products and 4 duds and then a bunch of mediocre stuff. So they'd have to buy a case of all the junk, a case of all the mediocre, and a case of the hot stuff. So in order to get everything, they had to buy everything. And for a lot of these little stores, it was a cash flow nightmare for them. So they would pre-sell a case. So let's say a case had 12 sealed boxes of baseball cards. They would pre-sell the case. Let's say it cost them $300. They'd pre-sell it at a loss just to be able to cash flow and buy all this stuff from Topps or Upper Deck or whomever. And so I started buying by the case on eBay in order to break it down and sell it by the box on Yahoo, or even just sell it by the box on eBay. And I think as your volume picked up, and I had many hundreds and then became many thousands of ratings on eBay, a lot of these wholesalers, specifically in the card market, would just reach out to you.
Very cool. That is a cool story, because it's just so different today, than what it was back then. It's really interesting. So you were selling for a long time, and then you kind of got away from it for a while. Was there something that did you burn out from it? Did you just run its course, or what happened?
So after the card market thing in 01, I kind of moved more to like camping gear, and again, wholesalers, and kind of found my way around different things. And I remember one person I was buying from was kind of like the middleman, and he ultimately just said, here, contact these people. This is my real wholesale source. And I had built that up to like a power seller business from like 01 to 04. But again, it was on the side. I had a full-time job. And I think it was a couple of things. I was definitely burning out. I felt like I was creating a job, which is not what I was looking to do. And I took on a partner. That didn't play out so well. So I think back then it was really part of the real challenge was the whole shipping. You have to ship every single item that you sold. It was not really worth it. It wasn't going to be my main focus. And, I think at that point my career was starting to kind of take off and spend more and more time focusing on my job that I really liked. So I didn't feel the drive to stick with it per se. So I definitely took some time away and just focused more on family and career.
I think it's important that you do recognize that this became a job, and I think that's just so important for people. There are lots of traps that will make this a job if you let it, and you will be tied to it. And, one of your specialties is time management. We're going to talk about some of that in a little bit. But I just think that that's such an important thing to recognize. When it is becoming a job, you better pull back and rethink what you're doing and say, there's got to be a better way. And that's when you reach out for help. Andy Slamans would tell you, I use this phrase almost every one of my podcasts, iron sharpens iron. You get around some real strong players like you, like Ryan Grant, like some of these other guys, and all of a sudden you're having conversations that you're thinking, at levels 2 or 3 above you, and you're like, wow, I could do that, and I think that's just so important. So very good, very good. So you, last year you and I were at a conference together, and I think I was sitting in front of you or what have you, and I remember the gentleman asking the question about, those of you who have a full-time job or something. I think he made everybody stand up or what have you, and more than half the room stood up. And then all those who can't wait to leave this full-time job and, that you're ball and chain and blah, 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 keep standing and for effect. And I think you and I were the only two that sat down in the whole room. I remember that, or one way or the other. And both of us are like, well, no, we kind of like our jobs. We kind of like what we do. And I think that says something. I think that says a lot about what type of seller you are. You have I think a good perspective, right, on that kind of thing. So you are full-time, you're full-time employed, and this was a side hustle for you, side gig, fair enough?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's definitely what I would call the side hustle, and it's evolved, and, now I've looked at it as something that, given how the world changes, like my father worked for the same company for like 35 years, and that's just not how, I guess corporate America or even the world really works anymore. I looked at it something as I want to potentially have something that if done right and established right, if my kids wanted to do something or they want to be running this, that they'll have that option. So it wasn't per se like a plan B. I definitely think about stuff like that, but I think this was more of, hey, I don't want them to have to start from ground zero if they can learn this when they're younger, and that's why I've even brought my parents into this whole thing, so that there's continuity and there's leverage, and if this is something they see as making sense or it evolves in a completely different way, then it'll be there. But totally agree with that it's something that you have to have perspective on.
Well, and I think, this is a great segue into, you and your time management philosophies and your skill sets, quite frankly. It's one of the things that is one of the most impressive things, that time perspective thing I think you offer. So what I'm going to do is take us into break, and then when we come back, I want to talk about time management and maybe you can give a couple tips and tricks, but it's really, I think, more so helping us break it down. So let's go to break, and when we come back, we'll talk about it. Today's podcast is brought to you by Seller Essentials, essential business solution for online sellers. Whether you sell general merchandise on Amazon or eBay, private label your own product, or if your focus is selling books, wholesale products, or liquidation lots, let Seller Essentials be your online resource for all things e-commerce. Essential resources, essential solutions, Seller Essentials, the Internet's premier venue for online professional. Visit selleressentials.com for more information. That's selleressentials.com. All right, in this segment, we're going to spend some time getting down into the dirty nitty-gritty of time management. And while it sounds boring, it really isn't. REA has been able to outsource his sourcing, takes those lists and now outsources his buying, and then outsources his prep and ship. And importantly, he doesn't outsource to one service, and he wasn't, putting anything down. He says they each have some specialties, and hence the reason he uses more than one. I think that's a great piece of advice. And then the best piece of advice I think he gives in this segment, and I want to point it out up front, is to take what you're doing really well and what's working for you, and rather jump to something else because you saw somebody else was doing it, or, shiny object over here. Just do more of what you were doing. You're doing it well. You're having success. Give it more, and you'll have more success. I think that is just so much common sense and great advice that we could all take, me included. Let's get back into the podcast. All right, we're back, and we're talking with REA Sheinbein, and REA is I call him mega seller, right? Too bad I'm going to use that term, and yet he is very distant from his business purposefully, right? Because you do have a focus, and you have two focuses, really. You have a big job, but you have a big family and a committed family. So I think you have really great perspective on that. So this is a segment of your life, and I use Darla Flack's term all the time. It's a segment, and you put a good perspective on that. How did you come up to a place where you can manage your time so well? Was that just something that you're born with? Did you develop it? Was it the college choice that you made? Where did that come from?
I think that's actually an interesting question, and a good one, because I think a lot of people struggle with that. And I think some people are just naturally born with it. I don't think that was per se the case for me. I definitely think it's something that you can work on. And I think, to kind of frame it a little bit, I'll give some color. When I really got into FBA, I'd say the summer of 2013. So I have 4 kids and my wife, and they were actually away for the summer. They were up in, the Catskills. And so I was working during the week, and then I'd come home to an empty house. And then on the weekends, I'd spend with them. And, so this went on for, 6 to 8 weeks. And that was really when I kind of got really into FBA, because there was no one home. And I pretty much turned the house a little bit into a warehouse and started like most people did. I had kind of gotten into liquidations in a bigger way, but that as aside, I was doing a lot of retail arbitrage at night. And I remember when my wife came home, she's like, what have you done? And like, how are we going to get rid of all this stuff? Because what ultimately happens is, in this business, a lot of times you become the bottleneck. If it's just you, then you can only do so many things at once. And if the stuff's in your house, it's not getting into FBA, and it's not, it's not going to sell. You're not going to make any money. So yes, you make money on the buy, but if the buy is sitting in your house, it's not really helpful, or in your warehouse or wherever it may be stored. So I pretty much between that fall and winter, I went on a self-imposed like buying spree, or whatever you want to call it. I wasn't allowed to buy anything until I had gotten rid of everything I had bought. And I had already begun to use some of these outsourced prep services. But what it really made me focus was that you, again, would be creating yourself a job, which was not what I was looking to do. And I definitely, I'm a pretty big reader, so I've read a lot of books on things like time management, but also habits and stuff like that. I love like psychology, both psychology selling and things like that. So this really kind of like made me look at this really quickly. As soon as she came home, I guess it was like 8 weeks alone, outside of the weekends, makes you kind of like think this is so much fun and great, which it is, but at the same time you lose complete perspective on what are you doing from a time management, and how are you using your time, and what's the value of your time. So immediately I outsourced as many things as I could that I didn't feel were good use of my time, where if it would, if I could pay someone $10 or $15 an hour to do it, by all means, have that kind of put off on the side and not spend my time doing that.
And so you've been, you're in a bunch of different groups, and you're in a bunch of different things. And I like Greg Murphy's quote, is, focus on everything that you're doing. And if it's not generating revenue, outsource it. That's his philosophy. Everything. Look right down at it and make sure that everything you're doing is generating revenue for tomorrow, or find another person to do it. You've been doing that for a long time. You had a private group you were in, but now you're using a prep service, correct?
Yep. I use multiple services, and part of that is because some of these services have better specialties than others, whether it's pallets via wholesale or liquidation, whether it's online sourcing where you're not getting 20 or 50 of an item, but you're more maybe getting 5 to 10 units of something. So everybody kind of falls into different categories.
And so that's a place that you've saved quite a bit of time, right? You also use a service that you're part owner of, is a sourcing service. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so your sourced inventory is designed really for clothing and shoes. So one of the things that, again, going back to time, I think there are lots of things you can do to kind of grow your business. But one of the things that like people don't necessarily focus on enough on is ASP, average selling price of something. So clothing and shoes has obviously less competition, and obviously more people are getting into it, but it was what we would call restricted/gated categories where there was some work to get into them. Your typical average selling price on these items also are much higher, and the profit margins, or at least the dollar profit, are better. So So if you look at your gross sales, you don't have to sell as many units of something that's 2 or 3x the price to make the same amount of money and to make the same number of sales, make the same dollar sales. So that was just a huge time leverage. Like, so as you begin to raise your average selling price, your sales is just naturally going to grow. So Your Source Inventory provides daily fines for people where, we cap each list to the number of people at 50 so that there isn't too many people seeing the same things. But the way I look at this, just like anything else, any service you get or anything like that, you need to kind of like use it as a starting point. So people always ask like, oh, you just click this, click that and buy. And yeah, you could do that, but you'll probably end up with a lot of non-selling things. There are certain things that I like to sell and you may not like to sell, or vice versa. And if you're on one of these services, the way I look at it is how much time did I save? You point me in the direction of 10 finds. I may buy one a week. I may buy one a day, but I probably shouldn't be buying more than that, even if I have the capital to, simply because then I'm probably not doing a lot of thinking, and you're not necessarily kind of putting your best into your business. So from a time perspective, if I can pay someone $100 to do something and I'm going to make $150 off of that, that's a win for me. I look at that as positive ROI, and it makes sense. Other people's businesses may be different, but again, this is where I can hand the list or any service to someone else, whether it's a VA or a parent or even my child or whomever. If you have other employees or contractors or whatever, that they will start to do sourcing off of a list, and they'll learn what's good and what's not good. That's valuable. So that's what that service provides. We provide at least 10 unique items, 5 business days a week, and you sign up on a monthly basis.
So, but in your own life, right? Mm-hmm. So you described that now you're outsourcing the buying, right? Because you're getting a list, your qualified list, and it's got items on it. You're having probably a family member, because you got your parents involved. They can handle that piece of it, right?
Yep.
And so now all of a sudden that stuff's not coming to your house. It's not coming anywhere near you. It's going to the prep service. They're prepping it and putting it in. So that's now gone, right? So in essence, you haven't touched a thing other than probably financed it or initially financed it, right?
Yeah, more or less. I mean, I think it becomes the way I look at this is, if you would like a business and not a job, then you have to start thinking like that. And the way to do that is exactly that. The less things you're involved in and giving other people power or control, and doing what's really important, then that's going to really help grow your business.
And you're kind of then the coach, right? You're kind of coaching them and kind of guiding them and saying, okay, here are the parameters, stay within these parameters, and oh, wait, that's not working, let's try this or what have you. But that's a different perspective. Boy, that just really, and I would hope you're letting people take some chances, right, and some risks, and hopefully figuring some of this out for themselves.
Yeah, no, definitely. For better or for worse, but everyone's going to learn in the process.
Love it. So you pretty much outsource most everything. Has there been anything that you thought to yourself, boy, I wish there was a way to outsource this? Have you come across some of those things yet?
There's definitely things I think about if I could outsource. Now, obviously, like you don't want to completely be totally removed, but at the same time, like if you can be, then there's advantage to that. I think a lot of people really struggle with the trust factor. I think a lot of people have a hard time saying, well, I don't want to give out my buying opportunities, because the buying is really where I feel like the most value is, or I don't really trust someone, or how can I give them my credit card, or how can I let them log into my account? Like, I think one of the things that people really struggle with is deciding where to let go from a trust perspective. And I think when you have family or close people involved, it gives you a lot more advantages. The reality is, if you have some complete stranger, you don't want them poking around or doing these things. Not even about stealing your business, but just like you're giving someone access to something that could mess your business up or could hurt you financially or whatever it is. I think that's where a lot of people really struggle with it. I think a lot of early sellers who have this perfectionist mentality also struggle with, well, nobody can do this as good as I can, and nobody can do this as good as I can. But at the end of the day, they'll probably get better. If you give someone else this task, they could potentially get even better than you did, whether it's shopping, sourcing, prepping, packing, any of these things. So I think it's a matter of looking at what you're doing and seeing what the true value of it is. I think people also always ask me, well, how do you do these things at night? Like, you work a full-time job, you don't do this during the day. It's a matter of focus. And one of the things I tell people is, I guess, I don't know what people in the general market call it, but I call it like time blocking. I say I have this task that has to get done, whether it's my parents have sent me over what they think they want to buy or whatever it is, or they have this. I'll say, okay, this task should take me 15 minutes, almost like put a timer on, block out everything else. Don't do anything else for those 15 minutes. If at the end of the 15 minutes I can't get it done, either set another 15 minutes or reevaluate, how long it's taking me this task, but really focus on things. I think I know you ask a lot of your listeners about books and stuff like that, and I read a lot of books. So, this kind of goes to the book, The One Thing, where it goes to this whole 80-20 rule, right? So 80% of your profits or business or your revenue is going to come from 20% of your actions. So the book really kind of makes it very crystal clear, actually. If you take the 80-20 rule on everything, right, you take your list, your to-do list, and you shave it down. You say, well, what is the 2 things out of 10 that are going to make everything else irrelevant? And then you shave that down and you say, which one of these 2 are more important? So basically you get down to the 90-10 rule, or almost even like the 99-1 rule, where what's the most important thing, and you focus on that, and you get that done, how many of those other things can fall away? So I look at my business in a very similar way. What's the most important thing I could be doing right now? Someone presents an opportunity to me. It may not be as good as everything else I'm doing, or vice versa, and I have to make that analysis done and just move on, because you're never going to be able to do everything all the time, and that's where you start to outsource more.
And so by narrowing it down is basically what you're doing. You just keep narrowing it down, find the action that's going to give you the best value out of your time. And in essence, you're saying to outsource the rest. I mean, really, that's what you're saying.
Yeah, totally.
Interesting. So, you've really you had a great year. You're going to have a great year again this year. You mentioned, that you're in a mastermind group to me, before we got on air. And so I'm interested, how did you find the ability to have trust? I mean, the thing that I like about your mastermind group, I don't know much about it, but I know a little bit, is just that it's only 4 people. I don't know who they are, but it's just neat to me that it's such a small, tight group, because a lot of the groups that I've seen are 10-plus people, and I think it's very difficult to get continuity out of that. How did you find the 4? How did the 4 of you come together, and how is that trust factor? How do you manage that trust factor?
Yeah,
because your competitor, like Sheinbein uses that phrase, cooperation.
Yeah.
Cooperation, right?
Yeah. So and Jay's right in the sense that I've always been a networking guy, not just in the FBA kind of community, but even in my professional career. It's one of the aspects that I like. So one of the 4 I knew the best. We had talked. We probably met in one of these groups. We spoke on the phone. We spoke online. And at one point they just approached me, and I guess the 3 of them had gotten together a few months before and asked me if I would join. And the truth is, it kind of goes back to, I've listened to all your podcasts already, and it goes back to what a lot of people are saying, and not to be repetitive, but, you networking, you give, so you give people value. Again, because I don't do this full time, I probably am not as active as some other people in some of these forums, but anytime I'm on, I try and help, and I'm always open to having people reach out to me and ask me questions, and I'm more than happy to do that. And Jay had that pay it forward thing where, I think I did 4 or 5 sessions on those, and you are just looking to give. And so a lot of these people, so the one in particular who I knew the best in the group, he and I had kind of given to each other, and we knew each other in person, had met a couple of times. And then, we you just get to a point where like that person, you truly trust that person, so to speak, in real life. And the other two I knew a little bit on the fringe and got to know them better. And trust was really critical, because at the end of the day, like, it all depends what you want to get out of it, right? Like, is the mastermind designed to move your business forward? Is it designed to move your entire life forward? Is it designed to give you sourcing products? Like, you have to really know what you want, but at the end of the day, in order to know what you want, you have to trust these people. Because if you're going to be taking advice, or you're going to be giving out, whether it's products or sources or information or whatever, you totally have to trust what they're telling you and what you're giving out, and they have to trust you.
And you have to know the why. I have an interview coming out next week, and I'm not going to say who it is, because it's really somebody who I just think the world of. And she said you have to know your why, right? So that's what you're saying, is you have to know your why. There are different reasons to get into it. And I think that's so important. And if all you guys align, magic. Yeah,
and it's so funny that you say that, because that is something that I focus on. When people come and they want to know, like, people ask me, like, how do you leverage your time, and how do you do this, how do you do that, how do you make more money or whatever? I actually ask people that question, like, why are you doing this? Because if the answer is just to make money, there's a lot of things you can do to make money, and there will never be enough money. Whatever it is, if you make 10, you're going to want 20. You make 20, you want 100. You make 100, you want 1,000, 1,000, million, and so on and so forth. So you have to kind of really determine what it is you're doing and why you're doing it. Because if you have no goal, like, I'm not a big, set goals, but at the end of the day, like, if you don't have a goal, you're just kind of going. You're not going anywhere, and you don't know why you're going there. But if you have a goal, you have a destination, you're going to be able to time manage a lot better. Because if it's just about, hey, I want to make more money, you kind of like go in different directions. And you see this a lot in this business, where people get in and they try this and they try that, and they instead of taking the success they have and just building on it and doing the same thing, a little bit more of it, they go and they start doing something else. Oh, retail ARB was working, but I heard an online ARB is great, or I heard wholesale is great, or I heard private label is great. And they don't build on any of these things. And a lot of it comes back to that whole why. They don't know why they're doing it, and they don't know where they're trying to get to. So it's kind of like, random pathfinding.
Random pathfinding. I love that line. Take the success you have and build on it. There is great advice right there, right? And I get the shiny object syndrome. I mean, it's hard when my wife would tell you I'm ADHD, HDDD, right? And she would say my ideas never stop, and it is hard because you're getting bombarded with this information. And you say, wait, REA's having success with this, I should be doing that. Oh wait, what about this? I should be doing that. And so it is hard. So I get that, but I love it. Take what you're doing and just focus in on it. I had a great interview. It's coming out. I think it's coming out tomorrow actually, so it'll be out before this one. And Ryan Witeska talks about just. He's pulling back a little bit because he's found, he got married, but he's found a sweet spot. I love that phrase, and I think he's found a real great sweet spot where, there is a diminishing return, right? After you give so much, there is a diminishing return, right? And so I think there is a risk to trying to do everything. You're not going to do anything well, generally, right?
Right.
And so by taking that success and building on it, you're not jumping on the next thing. You can learn that thing over time, but that's a foundational approach. So I think that's really smart advice. All right. So, we're getting closer to the end of the podcast. And so, you mentioned one book, right? So do you have any other books or podcasts? I know you're an amazing seller listener like I am. I mean, that dude just knows his stuff. He's just great. And then you and I also talked about Smart Passive Income and Entrepreneur on Fire, right? So you clearly listen to a few podcasts when you can, and I thank you for listening to mine. I appreciate that. How about some books? Do you have anything that you can give us that you think that listeners could use?
Yeah, so like I said, I read a lot of books, and the podcasts are more, when I have the time on a bus or something like that. But so as I mentioned, I read a fair bit, and I've listened to all your podcasts, and some of these have been mentioned. So at the risk of sounding repetitive or redundant, I think one of the authors I really like who has not been mentioned, and it's not per se a selling book, but it's again a little bit of like psychology of not sales, but the author's name is Dan Ariely. His main book is Predictably Irrational. And then he has a few follow-up books to that, Upside of Irrationality, and he has a couple other ones. Then there's another book called The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg, which is an excellent, excellent book. And then, The One Thing, which I mentioned earlier. And then I'd say the E-Myth by Michael Gerber is another big winner, I would say. And then I think I'd throw out, like, there are a bunch of authors that I've read most of their books, Malcolm Gladwell, and then Daniel Pink has, like, To Sell is Human and Drive. Then, again, I know I'm rambling on books, but The Compound Effect is a good one. But the last one I would say, specifically for the FBA community, if you have not yet read The Everything Store, which really teaches you about how Jeff Bezos thinks about what he's trying to accomplish and what Amazon really is, just from an analytics company, from a customer service company, and how the company, functions. And I think, if you've read it, great, but if you haven't, it just gives you a little bit of insight into how Amazon thinks about things.
Love it. Love it. I've read several of those, but I've not read them all. So I'm going to be increasing my reading to do. All right. So the goal of the podcast really is to help people move forward. And I think you've given some really great advice. The time management thing I think is just so important. I think, again, look at a prep company, right? And look at the prep company for your why. What do you want them to do? There are people that specialize in different things. There's tax-free states. There's a lot of different things to consider, and make sure you do your homework there. However, that's a great leverage of time, right? You also talked about bringing some family members in because that really helps you with the trust factor, right? So I think that's another great time management tool. And then you talked about using a sourcing service, one you happen to own, but it just talks about helping you get to that point. So I think those are all great things, and I think those are all useful tools. And a lot of people are doing a lot of them. But I'm looking for something else that somebody else can put in their business tomorrow, regardless of the size, that will help them move forward past that point of stuck.
So I think in order to do that, because each person is going to be different, right? If I give you one thing, it may not fit for everyone. Mm-hmm. I think the first thing everybody should be doing, right, is taking that step back and looking at their business and deciding where they want it to go. Because until you know what your growth, what you're trying to achieve out of it, you're not going to be able to figure it all out. But then once you know that, look at all the things you're doing on a daily basis. And you say, okay, I'm whether I'm retail sourcing, I'm online sourcing, and kind of, I would say, break down all your activities and associate some amount of time with each one of them. So this way you actually know how much time you're spending. I would say almost like take a catalog, a diary type of thing approach for maybe a week. And you'll actually get a much better picture of what you're actually doing for 7 days than you really think you are. I think a lot of people don't realize what they're doing, whether it's 8 hours on Facebook versus 8 hours of sourcing, or it's 8 hours of research versus 8 hours of Facebook. I don't know. But you will be surprised when you actually see what you're spending your time on. And after you write it all down and you analyze that, so I'd say take a week, write it all down, you're going to know now what you're doing. You're going to have a probably pretty good clue as to how to move forward, in the sense of you're going to eliminate the things that just don't make any sense, that they're not making you money, or they're just wasting your time, or you can outsource. One of three.
I think that's such great advice. And actually, I think both of them. I think there are two steps that you gave, right? So one is analyze your business. And that one, what came to mind when you were saying that, I remember reading, I tend to read a lot too, is, Bill Gates would go away for a week or 2 weeks by himself. And he would take all the white papers that he received. Everybody would send him everything that they wanted to do and all the different ideas. And he would go to a cabin by himself and literally just spend his time pouring through that and really looking to help set the direction. And say what you will about Microsoft, but I think they've had a little bit of success, and I think he had some success. So I think that's just great advice, to sit back and pull back and really digest it and again, figure out your why, right? And then to break down that time, I think you're absolutely right that people are going to be really surprised when they find out what they really are spending their time on. Ari, man, I really appreciate you taking your time tonight. And, our readers, our listeners and readers on the podcast, and I'll have links to all the things that you mentioned. How can they find out more? You mentioned that people can get in touch with you. What's the best way to get in touch with you?
I guess, we have the yoursourcedinventory.com is the service. We have a free Facebook group, which is, I guess it's facebook.com groups, Your Source Inventory, which is free to go into. I could be reached on Facebook, reach out to me that way. It's not like I have some, website, blog, or anything of that nature. Those are probably the best ways to kind of reach me.
Man, I really appreciate you taking the time, and I think people are going to get a lot of out of it. And if you do get a chance to meet Aryeh face to face, tell me if I'm wrong. Smartest guy you ever met. Hey, have a great night, everyone. Take care.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the E-Commerce Momentum Podcast. All the links mentioned today can be found at ecommercemomentum.com under this episode number. Please remember to subscribe and like us on iTunes.